Long before Silicon Valley existed, there was an Oil Creek Valley with the same financing model and all the same features associated with modern-day venture capital. It started 150 years ago with an idea that seemed insane at the time, and launched an industry that completely transformed the world. In the mid-19th century, the electric light bulb had not yet been invented. And whale oil was the best fuel to burn for illumination. Decimated local whale populations, however, had pushed whale oil prices through the roof, and the alternative, coal oil, was nowhere near as good. There was also a pressing need for lubricants. The Industrial Revolution had led to the development of machines like power looms and the steam printing press, for which existing lubricants, like lard, were extremely inadequate. The story of the modern petroleum industry begins with a man called George Bissell, who few have likely heard of today. Left fatherless at the tender age of 12, Bissell quickly learned how to support himself. He worked his way through Dartmouth by teaching and writing, and after graduation, dabbled for a while in education and journalism. Already a polyglot, in his spare time, Bissell studied to become a lawyer, and taught himself several more languages. Eventually achieving fluency in French, Spanish and Portuguese, and gaining the ability to read and write Hebrew, Sanskrit and ancient and modern Greek, Latin and German. Bissell, who was then in New Orleans, was forced back north by ill health in 1853. Journeying back, Bissell witnessed the primitive oil-gathering industry of the time, which relied on methods like skimming oil from creeks using oil-soaked rags. Rock oil at that time was being used mostly in folk medicine to treat sundry ailments from headaches, toothaches and stomach upsets to relieve wounds on the backs of horses and mules. During his journey, Bissell also made a stop at Dartmouth where, in a professor's office, he spotted a bottle containing a sample of the black, viscous, and flammable, Pennsylvania rock oil, and in a eureka moment, conceived that the oil could also be leveraged as an illuminant. Driven in part by a strong desire to put his financial troubles behind him, Bissell concentrated his efforts over the next few years into what most of those around him considered to be nothing more than a crazy idea. To turn his idea into a reality, however, Bissell needed to raise money, and for that, he needed validation. In 1854, Bissell and others that had joined hands with him, approached Benjamin Silliman Jr. of Yale University. Silliman was one of the most respected names in science in the 19th century. His father was the founder of chemistry in America, and he himself was a distinguished scientist and the author of leading textbooks in physics and chemistry. Silliman Jr. analyzed the properties of the rock oil that he had been given alongside prospects for refining it into an illuminating oil. His analysis was extremely promising. Rock oil could be used to manufacture very valuable products, and could also be refined into a quality illuminating oil, and gave Bissell's venture the credibility that it needed to secure capital. According to Silliman, rock oil could be distilled into several hydrocarbon fractions, one of which was a high-quality illuminating oil. Also encouraging was the fact that rock oil could be processed relatively cheaply, and that Silliman himself took 200 shares in the enterprise, which became known as the Pennsylvania Rock Oil Company. The fact that this was an extremely risky venture, however, was not lost on his investors. One New Haven banker, for instance, kept an incredibly low profile so his depositors wouldn't think that he'd lost his mind. Bissell and his investors also realized that they would only be able to profit from their investment if they could scale it, something for which current oil extraction, or more aptly collection, processes would be far from adequate. As an alternative to simply digging for oil, Bissell, after another eureka moment, looked toward salt boring, or drilling, a process that had been developed over 1,500 years ago in China and allowed for wells that went down as deep as 3,000 feet. This idea, like Bissell's previous one, was also met with significant skepticism, but is what was perhaps Bissell's key contribution to the founding and development of the modern petroleum industry. To execute their vision, Bissell's team hired Edwin Drake. He had no obvious qualifications except that he was extremely tenacious, and was a retired railroad conductor who could travel by train for free. At the end of 1857, Drake headed to Titusville near Oil Creek Valley, where he recruited a driller called Uncle Billy along with his 2 sons. Other drillers that Drake tried to recruit left, convinced that Drake was insane. Work, however, was slow, and the project's investors in New Haven were growing increasingly restless, and eventually, a banker by the name of James Townsend was the only one who still believed in the project and continued to fund it personally when it ran out of money. However, by 1859, even Townsend had lost hope and in a letter, instructed Drake to clear any remaining bills and return to New Haven. Fortunately for the history of oil, however, Drake didn't receive the letter immediately, and in the few days that it took for the letter to reach Drake, the 4-man team struck oil. Farmers along Oil Creek quickly spread the news that the Yankee has struck oil, and the success of Bissell and his team started a mad rush to acquire property in the area and begin drilling, effectively catapulting the modern petroleum industry into existence. Bissell himself rushed to the area where he spent hundreds of thousands of dollars leasing and buying farms around Oil Creek. The population of Titusville quickly mushroomed and land prices in the region shot up. By November 1860, 15 months after Drake had struck oil, 75 wells had sprouted in the area and several more dry holes scarred the earth. Oil Creek Valley demonstrated the American model for venture capital and innovation long before the first pioneer venture capitalists showed up in the almond groves around Stanford University that would in due course become Silicon Valley. And the success of this 19th-century venture capital deal did what venture capital tries to do today. 150 years later, it disintermediated the incumbent industry. That is a fancy way of saying that Oil Creek Valley put the whale oil industry out of business. It also disintermediated the capital city and very heart of the whale oil industry, the island of Nantucket, off the coast of Massachusetts, which thereupon went into a long decline until, eventually, it found a wholly new vocation as a haven for summer vacations.